Hello everybody, this is Loci WayOfLoci and welcome to the No Hit Podcast. Here it is my job to interview the extraordinary people in gaming, the hitless runners who beat difficult games without taking a single hit or point of damage, speedrunners completing games in mere minutes that would normally take hours, or those who have finished games completely blindfolded, or the amazing content creators and developers out there producing the engaging and entertaining content and games that we all enjoy. Today's guest is DrDootPHD, that's DrDootPHD on YouTube, Twitch and Twitter. Doc is a hitless challenge runner with a difference, having completed several Elden Ring Hitless runs using a saxophone, or specifically an electric aerophone, which we go into what that is and how that even works, as well as Doc's background in music composition, his experience playing or dooting live at GDQ or GamesDoneQuick, the huge charity speedrun showcase, and how all this even started, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Doot, PhD. Right, Doc, I appreciate you taking the time out for coming on the podcast today. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for asking me to be a part of this.
No worries at all. I've got a lot I want to get through to today, but I wanted to start with your name, to be honest, Dr. Doot, PhD, which I believe comes from an actual doctorate, if I'm not wrong.
That's right. Yeah, I have my doctorate in music composition, and it was one of those things where I wanted to, you spend all that time in grad school, and then you want to actually be able to use the doctorate, and I figured, why not on Twitch?
Why not? Definitely. I would like to ask, for someone who may not be familiar, I mean, the title music composition may sound like exactly what it is, but for someone who might be unfamiliar in that area, what is entailed in like a PhD music composition?
Oh, sure. So it's like I'm a composer. I write music, and sort of like in the classical tradition. So like for orchestra, for like chamber music, I've actually written like opera scenes. I've done like solo music. I've done electronic music, all sorts of stuff. But like very much like writing things down in music notation and then giving it to performers to perform. And a lot of that also involves like learning a lot of music theory. My minor fields when I was finishing my doctorate were in music theory and computer music. So I had to learn how to not only, do music theory, but also how to teach it as well. And then same thing with computer music. And it basically is just like a big old nerd degree. I had to learn all sorts of stuff about music history as well, about famous composers throughout time. So but my real focus was on like 20th century classical music, so like Igor Stravinsky, Shostakovich, that sort of thing.
And from someone who is I'm just an appreciator of music, not someone who has any sort of involvement or knowledge on the production of music. So this may be a very layman's question in terms of,
sure, yeah, go for it.
How do you compose? I mean, for like when you see an orchestra on like a behind the scenes or a video or a documentary or something, or in person if you do that. I've not unfortunately done it in live, just seen online. How does someone go about structuring a piece of music over across so many different instruments, or even start that approach?
Sure. So usually you can start off with like a single musical idea. Hopefully a few musical ideas, right? And generally speaking, if you're working with like an orchestra, you start off with what's called like a short score.
Okay.
So it's sort of like a reduced version of what you want the orchestra to do. Not necessarily like having all of the instruments, like all of their parts laid out, just sort of like a general, almost like a sketch of like what you need to do.
Yep.
And then there's a process called orchestration that you have to do, which is taking that musical idea and then kind of blowing it up so that it does include all of the instruments of the orchestra. And that process is very time consuming. It's very time consuming, but it's fun. It's really, really fun. So you'll see a lot of things where like in a lot of classical music, a lot of like famous composers, they'll write a piece for piano, just like solo piano. I'm thinking like Ravel, Debussy. And then later on they will orchestrate that piece from piano to orchestra, and it's the same piece of music but the color has changed. It's almost like the piano version is like a black and white version of a drawing, and then when they take it to orchestra it's like a full color painting.
So is the orchestration the part where all the instruments work together and there's a prior step in which you go to each instrument and decide how each are going to be played, or is that merged into one in orchestration?
Yeah, I mean, so so when you are orchestrating, you do have to think about the individual instruments and like what they do best. Also kind of like where they live in pitch space, like high, like a trumpet or a flute, like
Okay, yeah.
what notes they play and like kind of where in the register they play. It's obviously like trumpet plays higher notes than the tuba,
Yep.
but then it's also like balancing that all out. And there are a lot of orchestration books out there, a lot of call them treatises on orchestration, basically like how do you like oh, these instruments sound best in these ranges.
Okay.
How do you make it so that you can make these instruments sound as good as possible?
Interesting. What was that word again? Treatises.
Treatise, yeah. So treatises. Treatises.
I don't know why, but I just really like the sound of that word pronunciation.
It felt like I was on the spelling bee for a second.
And has it just been solely orchestral pieces, or have you also gone into, I guess, other categories, genres, quote unquote, of music?
Oh yeah. Actually, I've written 2 orchestra pieces, but a lot more. It's a lot more common to write smaller pieces because they are a lot easier to organize and get performed. You know what I mean? Yeah. I've written for string quartet. I've written some like mixed ensemble stuff. I've written for like harp. I've written for choir. Wrote a band piece a while ago. Saxophone quartet. There's a lot of solo saxophone stuff, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
Stuff that I've actually performed myself. Also done like some experimental stuff. I wrote a piece for electric guitar, but instead of playing the electric guitar like a normal person, I like laid the guitar flat on a table and like hit the strings with Allen wrenches.
Why not?
And yeah, why not? It actually, and like send it through a couple of pedals, and it sounded cool. So
where did the idea for that come from?
Just screwing around on the guitar, and then the thing was, what my first orchestra piece actually came from that electric guitar experimental thing. I took that electric guitar piece and I orchestrated it.
Fair.
And it actually, the orchestration like came out really, really, really well, and it got performed a couple of times actually, which is kind of cool for a composer to have an orchestra piece like performed by 2 professional orchestras.
Wow.
So it was really neat.
And again, this is a very layman, very basic question potentially is are these stuff that you do yourself, or is it part of a job? Or are you contracted by people to produce a certain type of music? How does that side of the quote unquote business work?
So this stuff was when I was in grad school. So it was part of my studies. So basically it was by myself. Generally speaking, it's really, 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 really difficult to get an orchestra piece, like let alone performed, but even just like read by an orchestra.
Okay.
You have to have a lot of cachet, a lot of connections, because you have to think about it. It's like an orchestra is huge. Yeah. It's got like, it can have more than 100 people in it.
I don't want to imagine the scheduling.
All of those people. Yeah, the scheduling, but also like how expensive that is.
Yeah.
Like, you're paying all those individual people to be there, and they've got a busy schedule of like having to do like a Beethoven symphony, and then all this other stuff, and then it's like, hey, you want to play my fun little piece that was an electric guitar thing? And they're like, what the heck? And so if you're getting pieces read by orchestras or even performed by orchestras, you're remarkably lucky. And I was remarkably lucky to have myself played.
Of interest, how is music assessed, if that makes sense? Unless it's for like you have a, say, game jam, for example. A game jam is where people develop a game within a certain amount of hours, or a week, or 48 hours, and they're given like a note of what it can be. It can be about alchemy, it can be about dragons, fantasy. So imagining something like that in music, saying about a particular genre or piece or for something. But in general, to me, it seems music is a very... what's the word? Not biased. What's the word when you have like a connection?
Objective?
Yeah, it's hard to be objective in measuring. So how is something like that assessed in an academic sense?
It's one of those things where just like any kind of art, anything that you make, it is all subjective, but you can kind of go off of how successful was it in comparison to what the creator or the artist wanted to have happen. where it's the composer or the painter or the sculptor or the game designer sets out to have a goal in mind, right? Like they're trying to make something. And the question becomes then, how good was the end result in comparison to what the artist wanted?
Okay.
Regardless of whether you like it, as like an outside observer, that's a whole nother story, so when you because I actually used to also teach music composition, and that was something that I had to deal with all the time, where it was like I'd have students and they'd bring me music that maybe is not my personal cup of tea, but as a teacher you got to be really really as objective as possible.
Yeah.
Because you also don't want to like force people to do things that they don't want to do artistically, and you want to make sure that they become like the best version of themselves that they can be. And so it becomes a thing of like, well, it's like understanding what they're trying to go for and then trying to help them figure out what's the best way to move forward in their artistic vision.
So seeing like the current version of their project or music and comparing that against the idea they have in mind of what they want that piece to be, and seeing if you can help to progress them to that.
Yeah, and there's like technical things as well, like like going back to the orchestration thing, like this idea is, if you're trying to get this idea to be like as powerful as possible, you need to make sure that the instrument is playing in a powerful part of their range, or this musical idea is really awkward to play on a violin or on a piano or whatever, and that's going to make it a lot harder for the musician to learn it, or this whole piece is like very easy to play except for these 2 bars that are just like impossible.
Okay.
And what'll end up happening is the person who wants to go to perform it will have an easy time with the rest of the piece, and then they'll spend 90% of their time practicing these 2 measures in the piece, and they'll end up hating you because of it. So it's like those sorts of like very practical things,
Maybe knowledge that because of just experience wise the students may not have acquired or even know about, kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%. And because at the end of the day, what is considered successful is like very much in the eyes of the person making the thing, you know what I mean? Whether or not other people like it, that's another standard of success. But it's not necessarily like the end all be all.
Before we go into, because people are probably confused.
I know, like we're talking. It's so funny. It's like this is a classical music podcast all of a sudden.
So we'll go into the stream, which perhaps people have like clicked on for. But before we go into that, is there any resources that you could recommend if someone was like, okay, this actually sounds like up my alley or something I want to learn more about? Is there any sort of online resources or books or anything that you'd go, okay, if you want to learn a bit more about it, check this out?
The one book that I really really like, and it's actually like almost like a history book, but it's really really well written. It's a book called The Rest Is Noise by Alex Ross. Alex Ross is, or I think still is, I don't know, is or was the basically the music correspondent for NPR, for National Public Radio in the States. And he's a fantastic writer, and The Rest Is Noise is basically a book that is a history of the 20th century through the lens of classical music. And so it's like going through all of the history of starting in the early 1900s all the way until the late 90s of like how music developed in relation to, socio-political stuff.
Okay.
And it's so well written. There's a lot of great stories in it, and it's really really interesting. And I think it's really worth, if you're interested in like learning about classical music, I think that's actually a really good place to start, because you'll learn a lot about like contemporary quote unquote contemporary composers the last 100 years. It's really funny. Classical music is very like, oh wow, we're gonna be playing this like brand new piece, and it was a piece written 100 years ago. Because everyone's so used to playing like Mozart,
Yeah, I can't remember where there's some random stat that's in my mind that's like going, the vast majority of like during events, like huge events, the amount of certain music like piano plays is like such a small percentage, and most of it was written like several tens, hundreds of years ago, but it's the stuff that's still played again and again nowadays that takes up like the vast majority priority?
Yeah, it's that's a whole nother conversation. It's like where classical music is today.
Mm.
It's mostly it has to do a lot with like how music is valued and how like what people's interest is in learning music. A lot of it has changed quite a bit. So, but like I said, that
Yeah.
you'll end up getting me into a whole different kind of rant. So,
No, no worries. Just one more time, the title of that book, what was it?
The Rest is
The Rest
Noise.
is Noise. Perfect. Right. On to stuff people may have been looking on for. So,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
streaming challenge runs. Again, I think we're starting with the start. Streaming, what was the first introduction for yourself, whether that was streaming in general or challenge runs was a big association that drew you into streaming afterwards? Either or.
You know, it's funny because like it actually is a good like segue from the sort of composer side of me to streaming, because a big part of why I started streaming was because I feel like a lot of people started streaming during quarantines, during COVID quarantines.
Yeah.
And that was very much the case for me. And I was finishing my doctorate, and a good friend of mine, actually another streamer, DeCapo VGM, was like, "Hey, like we would like hop on Discord and like play games together." And he was like, "You should think about like going on Twitch because you're really entertaining when you play video games." And I was like, I don't know. And then I started doing it just for fun to see how it was, and to like, like to one or two people, and it ended up being pretty fun. And it became a thing of like, oh, how can I like kind of turn this into like a creative outlet?
Yeah.
It helped me learn a lot about like video editing and sound editing. And then the other part of it too was that I actually had my aerophone at that point, like well before I started using it as a game controller. Well, I know we haven't talked about the saxophone yet, but the aerophone, the electric saxophone. And I'd actually originally gotten it because like I said, I was finishing my degree, and because we were in quarantines, I didn't have a way to like collaborate with other people to like come up with musical ideas. And so the instrument that I have been playing for like over 20 years, is the saxophone. And I have saxophones, but I also live in an apartment, and I didn't want to make my neighbors go into a murderous rage. So I was like, I wonder if I can find like an electric saxophone that would like work for me, because then I could like run it to my computer. I could play with headphones and not bother anybody and come up with musical ideas. And I found that it's a Roland aerophone, and it was exactly what I needed. Got that, and then around the same time started streaming, and it became a thing of like, what if I like started incorporating the aerophone into the stream somehow? And initially it was like music streams, like really simple stuff, like doing like video game music covers and that sort of thing. And was playing around with it, nothing too serious, but it became a thing of like, oh wait, there's this program where you can actually translate MIDI signals, the signals that the aerophone sends to my computer, the MIDI notes, to keyboard inputs. Wouldn't it be funny if I could get this to work where like it's almost like I'm playing keyboard mouse in a game? And then that joke became, well,
why do I actually do it?
yeah. And then lo and behold, it was like, this is actually really funny and actually doable. So we went from there.
So to give a visual, you might be better describing this than me. The electric aerophone Doc's talking about has the view of a saxophone with button inputs on the front, and those then inputs would then transfer into the PC to then be matched to certain keystrokes, like on a game. Is that saying about right?
More or less. So it has the fingering system of a saxophone. So you hold down a combination of keys on the front, and it's like you're holding down the tone keys on the saxophone, and then you actually have to blow into the instrument for it to like register. So it's like you doot into it, right? And so it's like you like hold down the first three fingers in your left hand, and then like two fingers in the right hand on the bottom part of the instrument, and that plays a specific note. And then you can play all sorts. It has a gigantic range because it has multiple octave keys on the back. So it can play like, I think like 72 notes or something like that, which in comparison, like a grand piano has 88 notes. So it's almost the range of a grand piano, which is pretty absurd for a saxophone. Normally saxophone has a fraction of that. like an acoustic saxophone.
So then that notes that you've selected, that would be then matched to, we're going to be talking about Elden Ring a lot today. So say the space bar, so note to space bar to jump in a game, in Elden Ring, for example. That's how the sequence would go.
Yeah, so it's like if I play E natural on the saxophone, that translates to dodge or run in Elden Ring.
And what was the first game you attempted with the dooter, the aerophone?
Cuphead, actually.
Oh, okay.
Cuphead.
Interesting.
It was one of those things where I wanted to start with a 2D game because the like movement was going to be a lot easier to deal with, and also Cuphead has really simple controls. You know, it's like move around, jump, fire, and then there's also like aim diagonally, that sort of thing. And at that time, everything was associated with notes that I had to play, and I was basically using it as a chance to learn the program. The program I use is called BOME MIDI Translator, BOME MIDI MIDI Translator, and it has really specific ways of like how it reads like MIDI input. And at the time, I did not really know how to make like a sustained movement. You know what I mean? Okay. So it's like, on a gamepad or on a keyboard, you just hold down the key or you hold down the button to like move. On the aerophone, at that time, I did not know how to get it to, if I hold a note, it holds down the button. So to move, initially, it was, I had to like basically play the note really, really like over and over again really fast to like move. And it was like a stutter step sort of thing. So it was like if I wanted to move right, I had to go and like Cuphead would like shuffle forward. It was really funny and really janky.
I was also you have to be careful of like hyperventilating or something because you're having to like breathe rapidly.
You're just like constantly playing, and it was super awkward. I did manage to beat the first boss, the slime ball boss. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it was super janky. But eventually it just led me to like tinker around with the program more, and I was like, oh wow, if I set it up this way, I can actually hold a note and it'll like continue like pressing the key down. Or oh wait, I wonder if I can get there's something on the back of the aerophone under the thumb rest that is called a mod wheel. If anybody like listening uses like electric keyboards at all, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a mod wheel. It's also a pitch bend wheel. In my community, we've lovingly called it the nubbin. And it's like it's like a little control stick, and it's up, down, left, right movement. It sends pitch bend signals if you tilt it up or tilt it down, and then has mod wheel signals it can send if you tilt it left or right. And then I found out that like if you kind of hold it diagonally, you can get both at the same time. So technically it's like 8 directional. And I realized I was like, oh, I could actually map this to be a left stick if I map it to like WASD controls on a keyboard.
Because visually, at least to me, it does look like an analog stick on like a PS4 or an Xbox controller.
The closest comparison as a control stick is actually the N64 controller.
Okay.
Because the N64 controller is also 8 directional. And that actually leads to the second game that I played was Ocarina of Time.
Okay, so you had to include camera movement then, I guess.
So Ocarina of Time is a single stick control game. So it doesn't actually allow you to control the camera other than to recenter. And that was actually like one of the reasons why I wanted to try it out, because I was like, this game already controls the camera for you, more or less. And it already only has one stick, and the stick is 8 directional. The nubbin is 8 directional as well. I feel like this will work pretty well. And the other part of it too, as part of like the joke, like sort of a joke, but also just like as a fun thing, was that you know how in Ocarina of Time you have an ocarina that you can play, and it's like it has 5 notes, and it's like the A button and then the 4 C buttons, right? The A button plays D natural, C down is F natural, C right is A natural, C left is B natural, and C up is D natural but an octave up. I mapped the aerophone so that all of those notes were the actual button presses.
So you could actually play
B natural was So the shtick was that to play the ocarina songs in the game, I would actually have to play the actual notes on the aerophone. And it's kind of funny because that control scheme is sort of like the skeleton of how my control scheme works for Elden Ring.
Out of interest, do you match the notes to particular keys, or do you do it from, okay, this is going to be the easiest way to do a jump? So I guess I'm asking, do you match them to keys first, or do you match them to movements in the game or actions in the game?
I think that's sort of like a distinction without a difference. It's both. It's whatever is the most comfortable keys to play, or most comfortable notes to play. And also there's like an element of like what is the most logical to me. One of the things, it's actually almost like a physical thing. It was like I mentioned earlier, where like I said E natural is in Elden Ring is my dodge and my run. The fingers that you have to hold down for that are the top 3 keys in your left hand, and then two fingers in your right hand. And that is actually the most stable, in terms of like physically holding the instrument. That's the most stable I can have. I could technically be more stable if I had all 3 fingers on each hand, but it's a really, really stable position, and it makes it so that I feel like I have like control over the physical instrument. It's not gonna like slip out of my hands or anything like that. And it makes it so that it also is like the most stable place for me to like manipulate the control stick on the back. So if I like need to like dodge to the left, I'm holding the aerophone in place, and then I can move my thumb to like dodge to the left, and the aerophone won't like kind of slip out of my mouth or anything like that.
I think the reason I was curious is because, as mentioned earlier, you've got so many variations of notes that you can pick how you want to go about selecting each button or each movement. Whilst in controllers, although there is an aspect of controller configuration, if a button's a button, I would say 99% of players are going, okay, the button's the button. We're not going to really change it. We're just going to deal with it.
Yep, absolutely. And because of that, there are some things that are, this is the crazy thing, because people are like, wow, that must be so, like, I can't even think about how difficult that might be to do certain things. And weirdly enough, considering how much I've played the aerophone at this point, as a game controller, there are actually some actions in the Souls games in general, that are actually easier on the saxophone than on a controller. For me, the one really good example, like I'm working on stream, I'm working on Dark Souls 3 no hit, and if you play Dark Souls 3,
which is a very difficult run of the trilogy, I'd say the trickiest one of the trilogy.
It's really hard. It's so hard. But those of you who've played Dark Souls 3, have ever done like Dark Souls 3 no hit, people know about the tree skip at Firelink Shrine. There's like a tree outside of Firelink Shrine that if you run up the trunk of the tree, you can like do a fancy jump off of it onto the roof. And it's like an area you're not supposed to be able to get to until later on in the game.
To get to the birds and the Silver Serpent Ring if you want to get there early and those sorts of things.
Exactly. That is actually weird. Like, personally, I find it to be really tricky to do on a normal controller because of the way that jump is mapped in that game.
So it's
you can
L3.
You can either have you can do L3 or like the double tap circle or B button. And I find that to be super awkward, especially because L3 is like on the same, it's like you have to push down on the joystick that you also have to move at the same time. And I find it to be really, really just like non-intuitive. And also because it's like full analog control, you can like kind of accidentally, instead of moving directly forward, it can be kind of weird. You can kind of like accidentally like be a little bit serpentine with your movement if you're not careful. Whereas on the aerophone, all I have to do is I run forward, and then the jump button is mapped to a distinct note that I play that is independent of the control stick.
So it's like having a 5th button on the controller just for that particular, just an easy one to click, not just the awkward ones they have to do on controller or doubles.
And then not only that, like it's because I have 8 directional movement, I can move directly forward, and then I can also, for my jump, the way I line it up is I move forward and then forward and to the right, 45-degree angle, and it makes it super consistent, which is funny because it's just like I'm playing on this controller that was never designed to play video games. Right? And weirdly enough, there are some things that are just like kind of easier. That said, there are a lot of things that are way harder. So it's not like I have an unfair advantage or anything.
I think I may have brought it up a game too early, but I did want to ask about the camera movements because I think that is separate. There's no like second nubbin, is there? That is an actual movement you've got to do yourself.
The camera control is controlled one note at a time, and it's only 4 directions. And and it's also not analog, so I can't control the camera speed
Okay.
on the fly.
Yep.
It is like an on-off switch. So, and like I said, 4 directions. I also, because the aerophone is a what's called a monophonic instrument. Like a piano is a polyphonic instrument. You can play multiple notes simultaneously. They can play chords.
Okay. Yeah.
A saxophone is a monophonic instrument where you can only play one note at a time.
Yep. So you can't roll and attack in the same. Like you can't have two buttons pressed at the same time.
Yeah. There are ways that I've gotten around it. In very specific things.
Okay.
So like in Elden Ring, there's a quick menu that you can access by holding triangle and then pressing the D-pad. And in that instance, I can actually map it so that I play a note and it presses triangle and a D-pad direction simultaneously. Basically a macro.
Yep.
And that works fine. But if it's something where like, I'm trying to run and turn the camera simultaneously, I can't do that unless I have run set to like a toggle.
Okay. Yep.
Where it's like I play a note and it will continuously hold the circle button until I untoggle it.
Yep.
And while I'm running, I can turn the camera. But I can't like play 2 notes at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's something that I've had to adapt to, and it makes some fights freaky difficult. I'm thinking Abyss Watchers in Dark Souls 3. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Because of the amount of like camera stuff you have to do.
Yeah, you have to keep track of 3 bosses and running around in circles.
Yeah.
Depending if you're doing the standard strategy of letting Red deal and then trying to get him on his own. But yeah, it's
Yep. Yeah, actually, just yesterday on stream, I had a 10-minute long Abyss Watchers fight. I got a hitless, so that was cool.
Nice.
But it was painful. And it was just like constantly having to like adjust the camera and figure out like which direction am I actually dodging, how am I controlling my run toggle. It was a nightmare, but that's just how it goes. And then there's also like aspects of like the Elden Ring no-hit run where like there are some bosses where you have to, depending like if you're using like the meta iron balls strategy, there are some bosses where their hitbox is really wonky if you're locked on.
Yep.
So you have to like unlock in certain situations, and that gets really scary because if I start a charge R2 while I'm unlocked, I can't turn the camera.
It just made me think then, so is a normal attack, or let's say an R2 attack, I'm just thinking of controller against notes, the normal R2 attack or normal strong attack and the charge R2, those will be separate notes because there's no holding a note kind of thing, is there?
They're the same note.
Yeah.
So for me, it's F sharp is R2. And if I want to do a quick R2, it's just like bop, doot, just one really short doot. But if I want to do a charge R2, I have to go bop, and then until it hits.
Oh, so you can hold the note. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hold the note.
Holding
the note is the equivalent of holding down the button.
Okay. Yeah. No, for some reason I thought that it would only like register the first instance and then would have to be a different note to like go, no, I want it held.
No.
Okay.
No. Well, and that's the thing. That was one of the things I had to figure out early on. Because you got to have like some consistency between how you play the instrument and how a normal controller would work. But like I said, the trick is that once I commit to a charged R2, I'm holding a note. I cannot turn the camera because I can't play more than one note at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I'm at the whim of being able to aim the attack with 8 directional control. It makes some things in like I'm thinking like particularly Bloodborne. Trying to do backstabs in Bloodborne is a nightmare. It's an actual night. Oh my god, it's so rough.
I'm just thinking of like BSB or Bloodstar Beast. You may not know, just
Bloodstar. Yeah, it's because it's really not like on a normal controller. It's not that bad because you can like aim with the camera.
Yeah.
But I can't do that, so I kind of have to do almost like a blind. Like I hope I lined this up correctly and I'm aiming in the right direction. It's the same thing with like not Gascoigne. I mean Gascoigne you can also do backstab. Garamond is oh my god, it's so rough on the aerophone.
Yeah, because I remember for
an Orphan of Cost.
Oh yeah, but I think just fighting that normally, regardless of controller. But with the backstab strat, that must be because with Bloodborne, people who may not have who do these sorts of strats, because the way Bloodborne works, people who are just in Souls, you have to do a charge R2 to the back of the boss in order for them to stagger and then do a backstab. It's not just you walk behind and do a backstab as it is in the Souls games. And with a lot of bosses in Bloodborne, they're not hanging around. They want to move away, so your sword sort of have to like aim your weapon as you're doing the charge attack to like catch them as they're trying to get away. And of course, that causes issues, as in your example with the aerophone only doing one movement at a time.
Yep, yeah, it's really, really, really hard. I did a not a hitless run, but just a BL4 run of Bloodborne on the aerophone a few months ago. And I had to the standard strategy for Orphan of Koth I couldn't do on the aerophone, like the backstab strategy. He just moves around so much, and I could just never quite land the hits. I'm sure if I practice it for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours, I might be able to do it, but it's freaky difficult, especially compared to a normal controller. I had to learn the AI loop cheese thing. It's like a speedrun strat, where you just like parry him over and over again.
Oh yeah, I think I've seen like a video. I never learned it myself, but yeah, I've seen.
Yeah, I had to do that. Requires one backstab, but that one backstab I could do. And then from there, you just like animation cancel him every time by shooting him at the right time, and then just like going in, hitting him a few times, and then just rinse, repeat. I think it's almost like 18 times in a row you have to do it. It's ridiculous.
For the aerophone, it produces noises. Obviously, being an electric instrument, you're deciding what noises. Are those the bass noises, or are those you've decided, okay, these sounds great for these sorts of runs?
Yeah, yeah, it's entirely up to me what sounds come out of it. Aerophone doesn't make sound in and of itself. It sends MIDI signals. So I send it from the aerophone to the MIDI translation program, and then the MIDI translation program sends like a copy of that signal to my digital audio workstation. Which has some virtual instruments set up in it. The default Doots that I use are it's a jazz scat sound. Most people think they're like, oh wow, this sounds like Super Mario Sunshine. Like da 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 do 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 do, like that, the like secret level music, and it's very similar to that for sure. But I have a whole bank of sounds that I could switch to. I used to have a thing on my channel called the Wheel of Doots that people could like redeem, and we'd spin the wheel and change the sound based on what landed on the wheel. It became kind of like sensory overload though. It was very chaotic. But I've got sounds like more traditional saxophone sounds. I can make it sound like taiko drum ensemble, like Japanese taiko drum ensemble, which I did for the my Sekiro playthrough. It was really fun. I can make it I've got like a few custom virtual instruments that like play samples of like Brian TTS saying crab and other silly like dongo and summon a horsey. It's very silly. And the one that people tend to glom onto is I've got a virtual instrument that's a bunch of fart sounds, and that one's a banger. And also there's one virtual instrument that is a bunch of samples from Dark Souls 1, your character taking damage, but it's like the gasps. They sound like very yeah, but they sound really inappropriate. Just because the Dark Souls 1 stuff, but then you mix it with the fart sounds and you get the fart moans, and it makes it just beautifully cursed.
Hey, what better combination could you bring out for a run?
Yeah, I've done it a bunch of times, and it's very funny. It's it's a crowd pleaser, let's put it that way.
Before we touched a little bit on Hitless, so I want to start nearer to the start, but just before I go on, I did read in an article about your AGDQ appearance, which we'll go into a little bit later, but it was mentioned in that shooters were an issue with your setup. Is that right, or is that?
Yes. Oh my god, shooters are so hard on the aerophone. I've tried. One of the major issues is that the software that I use, the Bohm MIDI translator, it does not do mouse movement very well.
Okay.
Very luckily, the Souls games allow you to remap the camera controls away from the mouse into the keyboard. You can control the camera with keyboard inputs instead of having to use the mouse.
Yeah.
But not every game is like that, and that includes like Lies of P.
Okay.
Is an example of a game that is like you can't remap the mouse, and then shooters are another big issue because you're having with I would say 99.99999% of shooters you're aiming with the mouse, right?
Yeah.
And the program program I use can technically move the mouse pointer position, but that's not actually how a lot of these games use the mouse to aim. Instead, they're using a parameter called mouse delta, which is measuring the speed and direction of the mouse movement. So a lot of times, a lot of these games, they'll like lock the mouse pointer and make it invisible at the dead center of the screen. And then the way it moves is that instead of the pointer moving around, it is just like measuring the mouse delta information. Program I use can't do that. So if I do the version that's like, oh, make the mouse move a little bit to the right, it's kind of like that stutter step thing I was talking about with earlier Cuphead. With like the early Cuphead, where it's like if I want to move the mouse, like try to aim, I have to repeat it. I can't hold the note down.
Okay.
I have to go to like move like, you know, a few pixels to the left.
Yep. And
you know, it's impossible. It's just impossible. I know there are some people who have figured out how to get it to work. There's one streamer, content creator, his name's Dino Bino. He plays Call of Duty and other shooters with a recorder, like an acoustic recorder. It's super impressive. And he's been able to figure out how to do like trick shots in COD with a recorder. But I've like talked to him and like asked him like how he does it. And he uses that mouse movement. And I'm just like, it's wizardry to me. I don't get how he's able to be so good at it and so accurate, because I've tried it with the aerophone and it's horrible. Oh my God. It's so confusing. It like breaks my brain. And I'm already not very good at shooters anyway. So
I'm just thinking of like old school COD lobbies, just imagining the talking like the talking just like, well, I just beat you with a recorder, so
well, to be fair, the one like sort of like competitive game style that does actually work on the aerophone I've tried, fighters.
Okay.
So I played Tekken 8 with the aerophone, and I was able to map that, and it actually works remarkably well. And I was able to rank up a few times in Tekken 8, and like people were like, "Oh my God!" And I actually had a couple of people like pop into my stream, be like, "Dude, you just beat me in Tekken 8. What are you using?" And I was like, "It's called a saxophone." He's like, "You just beat me with a saxophone?" I'm like, "Yeah."
Just like they're just going. I've just deleted it off my console now. Just deleted it off my machine.
Yep, pretty much.
Right, hitless running. We have mentioned it a couple of times, but as we've started with the original like introduction of the aerophone and with music, where did the hitless run start? Was it video, a stream? Like, what was the introduction and what was the first game that you started with?
So it actually started with me learning deathless runs first.
Okay.
There's a streamer who has been on a long-term hiatus, and I pray to God he'll come back because he's one of my favorite streamers. Name of Argue Barmies, a British streamer, and just the loveliest guy. Just like really, really funny, very self-depreciating. One of the things that everyone in the chat would just like make fun of how bad he was at video games. But the shtick was like him being like bad at video games. He was like, I'm going to beat Bloodborne deathless. And it was like, no, you're not. But then he did it. Yeah. And then he actually learned it. He did it. And it was this thing of like watching this guy who, you know, plays off being like a schlub, you know, being bad at video games, like slowly learning this like kind of tricky challenge run, you know. And it was like weirdly inspirational. I was like, well, if this guy can beat Deathless Bloodborne, surely I can do Deathless Bloodborne on a saxophone. Lo and behold, I did. And then I did Deathless Bloodborne and I did Deathless Sekiro after. And then
Bloodborne,
I went after Death.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say Sekiro must have been a nice one because I've always felt it's quite a rhythm-based game as opposed to Bloodborne or any of the other From Software games.
Yeah, it's pretty hard.
Yeah,
just because the movement on that game is like really good, but it moves so quickly, and because the camera, like the sort of like issues of like how turning the camera, aiming, that sort of thing, it was something where I had to like really learn it really well. But yeah, no, it was fun. And then I started learning Deathless Elden Ring, and I made the incredibly silly decision learning the hitless route for Elden Ring for a deathless run.
Okay.
Which if you are trying trying to do a deathless run and not planning on doing a hitless run, I don't recommend doing that because everything for a hitless run is designed to be glass cannon.
Yeah, definitely.
Like you're trying not to get hit.
Yep.
And so the problem was that if I got hit, I would die, and that would be the end of a deathless run.
Yeah, because in the hitless route, you're not leveling vigor. Depending on the route, you're most likely going on low health to activate a certain charm, so you can boost your health. Like everything's designed to be not just hitless, but if you take one hit, you die.
Yep, pretty much. And so that was a very silly thing for me to do. However, when I did get my deathless run of Elden Ring, it turns out that I'd only been hit 8 times for the entire run. So my deathless run was a PB8 hitless run.
Place to start.
And I was like, oh no, it's too close now. I was like, that's like how I would be silly if I didn't try to go after hitless now, because like I've already learned the strats, more or less. I know the route, and I just did it and only got hit 8 times. Like sub 10 PB means you're on your way. Like you know the route, definitely, and it's just cleaning it up from there. And the other part of it too is I went on the Team Hitless website and I was like looking up. I was like, I wonder how many alt controller no hit runs have been done, and there's a few. Like there's a handful for Dark Souls 1. There's like Frybeat is another streamer that people probably know from a long time ago, who still does a lot of runs. But he does it on piano. And he was the first in the world to do piano, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3. But for Elden Ring, no one had done it yet on an alt controller.
Okay. Of any variation, so no.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like no Guitar Hero controller, no DDR dance pad, no flight stick controller, no piano, nothing like that. Like all of the runs in Elden Ring were just normal. I should say normal.
Box standard controller.
Box standard controller or keyboard mouse.
Yep.
Or keyboard mouse.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, that's ripe for the taking. it's sitting right there.
Definitely.
So I was like, I gotta go for it. And yeah, that's how it started.
So because we've gone through a few deathless games at that point. Was it the incentive of, oh, there is actually like a world's first potential here that got you to do like Elden Ring first? Was it also like just enjoying the game as well? Both, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, Elden Ring is my favorite Souls game.
Okay.
Elden Ring is definitely my favorite Souls game. I love it. I love it to bits. I think it's really, really it controls really well, which makes sense considering it's like the newest game, and they've been like iterating on these ideas for over a decade now.
Yep.
And so it controls really, really nicely. I like the variation of builds that you can do in the game. Before I started learning hitless, I really liked the open world sections, but like, oh my god, the open world sections for a hitless run are pain. It's just so tedious to have to do the like 45 minutes of setup at the very beginning of the game over and over again. But I'm not gonna it's not like the game was designed for that, so I'm not gonna begrudge it too bad for that. That's more my own problem.
Just letting people know, in the Elden Ring hitless run, in the standard routes, and although in pretty much every route, you do spend a good portion of the runs normally take between like an hour and 3/4 to 2.5 hours, more likely depending on how much chat interaction, all that sort of stuff. And obviously
or if you're on a saxophone, it's like 3 to 4 hours.
And of course you're playing on saxophone. But a good portion of the first half of however long your run is normally item collection, setup, upgrade. So then you are in that glass canyon, as we talked about earlier, in order to deal with bosses through cheeses or some just fighting straight up.
Yep. I actually even timed it out for myself. Like, it's 15 minutes in Limgrave, 15 minutes in Caelid, 15 minutes in Liurnia, 15 minutes in Altus Plateau. And you go all the way up until you can get one of the graces right before Draconic Tree Sentinel outside of Lane Dell.
Yep.
And then you go back and you do a little bit of cleanup to like get a few talismans. And then from there, you're like, okay, now I can fight Margit.
Go right back to the opening area to start.
Yeah, and the reason being is then you've set up your glass cannon, you can beat Margit in like 3 or 4 hits.
Yeah, and without risk, because you've probably got Margit Shackle, I assume, in your route as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it just like it makes it so you can just like rip through the bosses fairly quickly, but you do have to spend that much time in all these areas just like running around on your horse, picking up items, and it almost becomes like a weird like Zen thing of just like, all right, I know exactly where to go. We do this exact thing over and over again.
Bit like when driving, you just like zoom out of it all and just like get muscle memory take over.
Exactly.
The reason I asked specifically about Elden Ring is because it's one that you didn't just stop at the any percent, you also went into a very chunky run after in the Great Runes, is that right?
Yep, sure did.
So for someone who may not be aware, the difference, I mean, I could go into it, but the difference in scale of a Great Runes run to an any percent run.
It adds like another like third of the game. So like there's a setup portion, like for the 80% run, there's like the setup portion that's like honestly almost half of the run time, and then there's the rest of the game. So and you only have to beat 2 Great Rune bosses to unlock Lane Dell, and then you go through Lane Dell, Mountaintop, Firmazula, and then the final boss rush. But then with all Great Runes, you have to beat all of the Great Rune bosses, so all of the Shard Bearers, so Rykard, Godric, Radon. Oh my god! Since the DLC came out, I keep mixing up Rolana and Renala.
Oh yeah, I've done the same. Yeah,
it's like messed me up so badly.
They had to do it intentionally.
I think it's Renala,
yeah.
in the Magic School, in Raya Lucaria.
Then Millennia,
and then Melania and Moog, and with that, it's like you basically go through the any percent, and actually for the any percent portion, I even add in Rykard at the very beginning, so I can get the Serpent Hunter.
Yep.
But then after you beat Radabeast, before you actually touch the Marika statue to run credits, you warp out of there, and then you go fight Renala, and then you do the long trek to Moog and Melania, and all of the mini bosses at like Commander Nile and what's her face, the Night Lady on the horse.
Loretta,
thank you. So you got to do all of that. So like I said, it adds another like hour or so to the run, if not longer.
And this might be maybe an odd question, maybe one you've asked previously, but do you my question was blowing air for several hours at a time, does it cause any sort of not breathing issues, but I think you know what I mean, any sort of discomfort or anything like that?
It's actually not the breathing, it's the posture thing.
Okay.
You know, it's basically being in a saxophone playing position, like your arms are kind of up and you know, a little bit forward. It can be hard on my shoulders actually, so I have to be a little bit careful about that, because you have to imagine it's like I'm playing a saxophone for like 5 hours straight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it doesn't really affect my breath that much. That's like one misconception. I feel like a lot of people like, oh my god, you must have lungs of steel. And I'm like, no. I mean, like I know how to control my air just from like decades of playing saxophone, but the aerophone doesn't require nearly as much air as an actual saxophone, because I'm not having to make a reed vibrate. You know, it's just like there's an air sensor just inside of the mouthpiece. Yeah. And on top of that, I am not literally always blowing into the instrument to do things in the game. It's if you think about it, like when you're fighting a boss, you're moving the left stick and then dodging at a certain time and then like attacking at certain times, right?
Yeah, you could be strafing for like a few seconds or like 10 seconds whilst the boss is hiding, and
because my movement is tied to the nubbin on the back of the instrument, I don't have to play notes to move, so I can sit there and not have to like worry about blowing into the instrument, and then if I need to dodge, I'll dodge like like 2 or 3 times, and then there's like a chance for me to like breathe in between all of that. So the only time it becomes an issue is like if I'm having to do constant inputs over and over and over and over and over again. And the only Souls game that has made it to the point where I've actually had to like, oh wow, I actually have to control how much air I'm taking in, Sekiro.
Okay, yeah, with the
because Sekiro has like non-stop inputs in some of those fights, like in Ichiro. It's just like constantly having to like, deflect, attack, deflect, dodge, attack, deflect. It's just over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And you have to be like really, really careful about how much air you've taken in and that sort of thing. It was pretty wild, especially like fighting Shura Ishin, like at the end of the Shura ending is actually a little exhausting, because it's one of those like sort of non-stop fights.
Gotta imagine it's even more awkward with his dodge move that he can do, that you have to switch notes so quick to avoid that or be able to parry that in time.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Because I was my mind words. My mind immediately went to the centipede, basically the Wolverine in the game, if you remember it. The one does like, the 10 combo.
That one's actually like not too bad, because it's not too many. Like it has a really distinct pattern. I think it's like phase 1. It's like 4 deflects, pause, 5 deflects.
Yeah, it's like 1 2 3 4
something
5,
like that.
1 2 3 4 1 like that, and then stomp.
That's what it. Yeah, and then stomp, and then with that, it's like that's like 15 seconds of playing or less, and that's really not too bad. Like I said, it's like when it starts to be like a barrage that goes on for like 45 seconds or more, that's when it's like, oh boy.
And with like Genny or Ishin, that's not just deflects over and over, it's a quick change between deflect, attack, dodge potentially if he goes and does his lovely arrow moves.
Yep.
Is accidental triggers a thing, being breath related?
Yes, very much so. That happens all the time. It's really annoying. One of the things I have to be very careful about is I mentioned toggles earlier. So the way that I personally have the one toggle I use literally all the time is my run toggle. Because you're having to run in these games all the time. And I need to be able to run and turn the camera simultaneously, so I gotta have a run toggle. I'm gonna get technical about it because it's just easier for me to explain. I'm sorry if this doesn't make sense.
I'm ready.
But like I said earlier, my run note is E natural. I set my toggle to be also E natural, but 2 octaves lower. So it's the same fingers on the front that I hold down, but then there is with my my left thumb, there's a 2 octave lower key that I can hold down. And it plays that note 2 octaves lower, and that's my toggle. So if you watch me on stream, you'll probably hear me go like you'll hear me go bulp, 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 like it's like the same note, but just like in like a low register and a high register. And that's me toggling and non-toggling my run, which becomes actually really important in a game where like you actually have to worry about your stamina. The thing that can happen though is that with the aerophone, if that low octave doesn't quite register properly, instead of running, I'll dodge. And in certain situations, that means instead of running across a cliff, it means rolling off of the cliff.
Which has its issues.
Which is a problem. And so I have to be like very careful in certain situations about like, making sure that I'm playing the right note. And then there's like the obvious like brain farts every once in a while of like, oh wow, I just completely forgot how to play a saxophone for a second.
I guess like keep track of the notes.
What note do I need to play?
I didn't even consider that part, even though it is actually quite an obvious major thing.
It's just like, oh wait, what note is mapped to what? It happens every once in a while, just like my brain just like short circuiting. But I feel like that happens to everybody. Even on a normal controller, like what button was I supposed to press?
Definitely. Or, like happens in all these runs, just like which button press, because all your concentration can be on a particular route or section or boss or thing, and then the obvious stuff is just like brain's like, we don't need that at the minute. Just like, no, I do need that.
Because it's like it becomes like muscle memory. Right. It's really just muscle memory. And then every once in a while, like if you have to like manually think about it, you're just like, wait a minute, what do I actually have to do? Instead of being on autopilot. So the accidental inputs can happen. The other thing too, actually, the aerophone, I mentioned how there's a breath sensor inside of the mouthpiece. It is incredibly sensitive. It's super sensitive to the point where if I talk too closely to the mouthpiece, like not my mouth on the mouthpiece, but like if the mouthpiece is too close to my mouth and I'm holding down a note and I talk a little bit too loudly, it'll trigger the note.
So like if you interact with chat or something like that, and it's just like
or if I laugh or something like that, it'll trigger. And like sometimes that you'll hear a lot, like if I beat a run or something like that, or like beat a certain boss, and I'm like, let's go, or something like that. The aerophone is like next to my mouth usually because it's like I just beat the boss and I'm like yelling, and that yelling is actually triggering the aerophone, and you can actually kind of hear it in the background, like chirping basically. It's like because it's like it's hearing my voice, like my voice is actually triggering the breath sensor. And like I said, I have to be like careful of that I'm not like holding down any keys on it so that it doesn't accidentally like kill me. It's just so it's funny. It's something I found out fairly early on because there'd be times where I'd be like talking to chat and then I'd like accidentally roll off a cliff, because the aerophone was like too close to my face.
Just have to get like reminded by reading the next moment, you are actually like walking towards an enemy right now. Rolling towards or
yep. So you gotta be very, very careful about that kind of thing.
This might seem like an odd one, but it's just reminded me with the noises. So I'm thinking of like the Genny fight or like one of the high inputs fights, whether that be in Sekiro or anything. Have you ever been doing one of those fights and gone, you know what, this series of sounds, this tune is actually not bad, you know?
There like it doesn't really happen that often. That's something that people ask me is like, oh my god, like could you like compose a song out of the inputs, or like, oh maybe you should record the Doot sounds and release it as an album. And I'm like, it would be absolutely unlistenable, because you have to think about like the inputs that you're putting in are, you basically have like 3 inputs.
Yeah.
And so that's like 3 notes. And so it's like, dodge, attack, strong attack. And then with Sekiro you get like, deflect. So it's like 4 notes. And it's mostly the one note, which is dodge. So it's just like doot 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 doot, and it's like not in like a real rhythm, it's just like it's like as music, it's like kind of unlistenable. That said, every once in a while I'll like, it'll surprise me. And it's usually if I have to do something that involves more than just dodging or something like that. And the one example I can think of was I was fighting Malekith one time.
Okay. Yep.
I was fighting Malekith one time, and I got out of phase 1 going into phase 2, and I've got a script for him where very beginning of phase 2 I should be able to break his poise immediately, like after his, like during his first attack, and then do a charge R2 to beat him basically.
Yep.
And I don't really remember exactly how this happened, but I played a lick that sounded like Luigi's Mansion. It was really funny. I don't really I think I've got a clip of it somewhere, but I basically, like, right when he went to go attack, I on the aerophone I went doot doot doot. Like it like sticks into my mind, because like it's like doot 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 doot, and then in my mind I'm like doot 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 doot. So but it had something to do with, I had to like change, I like play a note to change like what weapon I'm holding, and like right hand, left hand, like sort of reapplying the iron balls to be both hands, and then locking on, and then playing like doing R1 and then to an R2 or something like that. And just that combination and the way it like sat on the aerophone, it had this like goofy like doot 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 doot. It was very funny.
It reminds me of this old clip that's these couple of college guys on like a ping pong table and like throwing a ball to each other, and it suddenly sounds like Super Mario just randomly from the ball bounces. I don't know if you've heard it before. But...
Yeah, it's total coincidence when that kind of stuff happens. Absolute coincidence. I think I had like one other moment of like, it wasn't like something that sounded like something in particular, but it was like I was working on Dark Souls 1 SL1, and the run back to Manus, there's like an elevator that you take down, and then I had to like swap some rings around, and I was like I got pretty good at doing it fairly quickly, and the menuing for it made it sound like a weird jazz riff. I just remember it ending on like a weird honky note. It was really funny because I had to do it over, because the Manus was kicking my ass, and I had to like do that run back over and over and over and over again. And every time I got on that elevator, I was like, it's just like, wait a minute.
I was just thinking, one day you'll come across a game or a running section and just go, okay, the Mario theme is perfect for this. Like, it just works.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Or we can only hope, at least.
Yep.
Mentioned DS3, we mentioned a couple of things, but how's that been after doing such long runs or so much of Elden Ring? How's it been going to a different hitless game? It's
been really rewarding. I would say it's very hard. It's significantly harder than Elden Ring, I would say, overall. The trick with Elden Ring, and a lot of hitless runners know this already, a lot of like Elden Ring is one of the easier games to do no hit, primarily because most of the boss fights you can script. And for people who don't know what scripting means, it basically means that you go into the fight and you can literally do the same actions in, like, if you do the same actions in time properly, it will literally be the same fight every single time. And so it's like super predictable. It's just more like memorizing a pattern than it is about like, reacting to the boss, which is really nice because, having to react to the boss, there's like an element of randomness and like having to rely on your reflexes, and that can be really scary in a no-hit run. So making it so that there's no guessing involved is like really, really nice.
Yeah, it's like, as an example, Radagon and Elden Beast in the typical routes of a no-hit run are literally 3 fights, depending on, like say, if you're doing the iron balls, which is a very strong weapon. If you're doing that route, they are literally 3, which may be a surprise to a lot of people who played Elden Ring and gone, wait, those are pretty tricky bosses. Yep, you can stagger them both and they're pretty much done, like they're free. Basically.
I will say on the sax, Elden Beast is actually a little. It can be a little tricky because of the fact that earlier I was saying about like the once I commit to a charge R2, I can't turn the camera. The timing of the charge R2s you have to do for Elden Beast, you don't really have time to turn the camera, and you end up like having to aim your charge R2s off to the side, and you have to like kind of hope that you're aiming properly. But you are right though. It's like they're really straightforward. If you know what the script is. That said, Dark Souls 3, very few bosses are scripted.
Yeah, definitely.
Very. For me, the only fight I would say is 100% scripted for me is Pontiff Sullivan. That one's 100% scripted.
Yep.
Actually, let me see if there's any others. I feel like there might be.
Is
some
Crystal
others,
Sage
actually.
not bad? Or depending if you do the parry strat or
don't ask me right now.
Okay, maybe not. Maybe not.
Crystal Sage has, oh my god. I just had a week of Crystal Sage being just an absolute monster to me.
Never mind.
Crystal Sage is almost scripted, except the very beginning of the fight, and that very beginning of the fight is what's been screwing me over a bunch. But let me look. Gundyr is not scripted. Vort is semi-scripted. Abyss Watchers is not scripted. Volnir is not scripted. Dancer's not scripted. Deacons is, I guess you could kind of say scripted, but like not. If you use the skull strategy. Pontiff is scripted. Aldrich is semi-scripted, but is very RNG heavy still. But it's more of a patience game. Yorm is not scripted. Dragon Slayer armor, I actually do kind of script.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you can actually skip phase 2 if you script. You basically like do a certain amount of damage at the very beginning of the fight, and then wait for an opening, and then from there on, the rest of the fight is actually scripted.
A bit like Aldrich then, with that kind of damage.
Yes,
moment.
Yeah, it's very similar to Aldrich, where it's like you're waiting for a particular, like you do a certain amount of damage to a threshold, and then once that threshold is hit, the fight is scripted.
Yeah, okay.
Twin Princes is actually scripted because I'm using the fog wall cheese. Like that, if you've ever seen that, it's very funny. And then obviously Soul of Cinder is absolutely not scripted.
No one has ever found a way to make that easier or script.
No,
there's been no way.
That fight is outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous. And it's so funny because everyone who has like done Dark Souls 3 no hit has told me they're like, Cinder will become your favorite fight once you figure it out. And I see where they're coming from, but I feel like that's a little bit of Stockholm syndrome.
True, that is. I mean,
where it's just like, I've had to do like hundreds of hours of practicing this one boss, and I kind of like him now. So, even though he's like killed me approximately 1,000 times, because it's 5 boss fights in one. You know what I mean? Like he's got the 4 different phases in phase 1 that he can just like randomly switch to.
Yeah,
and each one. Oh my god, it is so much. It's so tricky, but I do feel like I'm like starting to understand it pretty well. And it's one of those, but it is pure reflexes. Like that is a fight that like there's no like pure script for it. It's like you just have to fight the fight.
Yeah, you can do extra damage. You can, if you do a heavy weapon, you can sort of do a stagger pattern, but there is no flat out cheese or easy way to do things.
Actually,
go on.
I think Mikolash showed me there is technically, I think it's either a sorcery or a miracle only route. There is one spot in the map that you can actually trap him on, and then you can actually script it that way, but you have to have a very specific build for it.
Okay, great. That's interesting. I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah, it's like those like weird like splintery wood things all over the map. There's like one combination of them where if he gets caught between them, he will continually run at you during sword phase, but like not actually do anything.
Okay.
And you can actually cast spells over it and just continually hit him until he's dead, which is kind of funny.
It reminds me of Shilky, who is an amazing no-hit runner of various games and multiple game runs. Uploaded, I can't remember how many minutes, like 20 minutes plus run of him doing Soul of Cinder Hitless, NG plus 7 without rolling, and it made me sick watching some of that. How it's so extra. It's just like, or like I remember when I was, because I also learned SL1 all boss
bosses, Dark Souls 3, not no hit, just like playing through it.
Mm-hmm.
But I watched Gino, his playthrough. That was like SL1, no upgrades, no infusions,
Yeah, yeah.
no hit all bosses, and Demon Princes was like a 20-minute long fight, and I'm just like, dude.
Just, so you don't have to carry on. You can stop. It's okay.
I was just like, oh my, how do you not just like pass out during that? I just like, I don't get it.
Like impressive the level, like any
The
no hit run.
concentration.
Yeah, any no hit run's impressive, but the level there is levels within that, and those levels go deep with some runners who do these sorts of amazing things.
Well, it just shows like a really fantastic understanding of how the game works at that point, you know.
Definitely. We've talked a lot about runs and how you do these runs, but I guess we've not really touched on where you do these runs. You stream these runs. We talked a bit about it, obviously the introduction to Twitch, but is there an appeal of streaming other than being able to like showcase the runs, like being able to interact?
Yeah, I mean that's a big part of it, is like being able to interact with people and like, because that's the thing, like I would feel very, very, very silly if I was learning all of these runs and not showing them to people. If it was just me playing a video game with a saxophone alone in my room. I would feel very silly about doing that, you know what I mean?
I mean, everyone needs a hobby.
Yeah. But like a big part of it is like, you know, I want people to see it because I think it's super fun. I think that it's something that I want to be entertaining and like maybe even inspiring to some people. I know there have been some people who have gotten into alt controller runs because they saw like the Elden Ring no hit run on the sax, or even just like getting into no hit runs in general because like, well, if this jerk can play it on a saxophone, surely I can do it on a controller. And I'm like, that's the spirit. That's good. That's great. So that's what I hope that people get at what people get out of the stream.
It just made me think, have you ever thought of branching out to other other potential instruments, or is it stick for this for a while now?
You know, kinda. I do like technically I could do like I have MIDI piano controllers. I could technically do that. It's just I wouldn't be dooting. You know what I mean? Someone in my community did find there is a MIDI bagpipe.
Okay.
It's like a practice bagpipe that is like really nice. Like it's very professional. It's very slick. It doesn't play out loud, so like you're not like having to play a bagpipe in an apartment, you know. More
neighbor disturbances.
Yeah, right. And I looked at it and I was like, that would be absolutely hilarious to do like a bagpipe run.
Yeah.
The trick though is that it has significantly fewer note inputs than the aerophone. So like I said, like aerophone has like 72 inputs. The bagpipe has 7, so it's significantly more limited. And on top of that, it does not have a nubbin.
Okay, so
which honestly, the control stick thing on the back of the aerophone is the secret sauce. Like it really is. Like being able to have like this, like being able to control movement independent of actually playing the instrument is what makes this entirely possible at all for me. Without it, I don't know if I would be able to do even like a deathless run.
So what I'm hearing is you just need to find the right game then for the the bagpipe run.
Yep.
Going in terms of being able to showcase to people these kinds of runs and what you've been doing, going into events. So I think the more recent one was GDQ showcasing bosses. Is that right?
Yep, sure was. Yeah, AGDQ in Pittsburgh.
And how did that process go? Is that reached out, they came to you, or how did that background process go?
I applied like anybody else who applies for GDQ. The thing was the first GDQ event that I did was actually last fall. It was the GamesDoneQuick Hitless event, the collaboration between Team Hitless and GDQ.
Yep.
And that falls under their hotfix program. So that's like their online only, like everyone's remote streaming from their own machine. And that's where I did a partial 90% no hit run of Elden Ring. Basically, I just skipped the setup.
I was thinking that, yeah.
They were like, how about we don't do
the torrenting
an hour of running around on the map and say we did? Yeah. And I'm like, that sounds great to me.
Yeah, I'm sold.
So, yeah. But so I did that. But then right after, it was like it went really well. And then I had a few people reach out and were like, the AGDQ applications are ending in like a week. Like the deadline is like a week from now. And I just got done with the GamesDoneQuick Hitless event, and they're like, that was awesome. You should absolutely apply for AGDQ. And I was like, okay, sure. And so I sent in my application. Basically, I was like, I'd be willing to do the same run that I just did for GDH,
Yep.
for the in-person GDQ. And then I had a few folks reach out from GDQ, and they're like, hey, we really, really like this, but doing, like, we've got a whole lot of people. There's a lot more people for this event, and time is really limited. So would you
Yep.
be willing to do, like, a boss rush or something like that? And I was like, that sounds great, actually.
Yeah.
Just, like, do something to show off the bosses. Not as a speed run, not as, like, a full hitless run, but just, like, a showcase
Yeah,
of, like,
definitely.
just like pulling up save states. And they're like, okay, yeah, we'll get back to you. Let's see if that works out. And then they're like, yeah, you're in. Let's do it. And I was like, oh, okay, sweet.
Let's go.
Yeah, a big part of it too was I've never done anything like this outside of my home before, you know.
Yeah.
I never had to. So the big part of it for taking the show on the road, as it were, was figuring out how to get all of my aerophone software,
Yeah.
and the digital audio workstation and everything working and transferable to another computer, which was like the hardest part of the whole process. Tech setup for my 30 minutes at GDQ was 3 hours.
Oh wow, man.
It was a lot.
I imagine it's a lot more trickier than like OBS copying settings over or something like that.
Correct. Yeah, the hardest part about it was actually getting the sounds to work properly. That was the part that like getting the aerophone to actually control the game, installing the game, that was fine. It was getting the sounds to come out, which turns out that was actually like the part that was most important, I think.
Yeah.
In terms of like the show, because that was the part that people were like reacting to the most during the event. Like people were laughing so much. It was like it was very satisfying to hear people laugh at the Doot sounds, because I'm so like inoculated to them. Like I hear them every day. Like I basically don't hear them anymore, so there's like no reaction. And like my community also, like, you know, all my regulars like hear it all the time, so like they don't really like register it as being like funny, I guess. It's just sort of like background noise. But to people who had never heard it before, it was hilarious. Like people were saying that they were like crying laughing, and I was like, really?
I
was like, that's great.
It was supposed to have been good because probably should have made this thing earlier, but anyone listening to this will likely already know AGTQ, which is Awesome Games Done Quick, a charity like marathon showcase events of different runs, being a live person event. And from what you said there, was that like your first experience other than like commentary perhaps with other runners online, like having physically people there going like reacting to the dooting?
Yes. Yeah, that was the first time I've ever played the aerophone as a game controller in front of a live audience. And the funny thing was, I was like, wow, this is the first time I've played saxophone in front of a live audience in like a decade. I was like, this is just like a saxophone recital, right?
Because I imagine was the trickiness in terms of, okay, there's funny commentary going behind, there's people reacting behind. The likelihood of an accidental input is quite a bit higher now because of just like laughing or.
It was. I'm not gonna lie. It was. That was like one of the hardest things. Like it's sort of like a sensory overload, because it's like I'm on a stage, you know, like I'm hearing the commentary in my ear. There's all sorts of like people are reacting in the crowd, and I've never had to do this in a situation where like I've got that many people watching, like physically they're watching me do it. And so it was a very different kind of mindset that I had to get into. And yeah, it was a trip, but it was super fun. It was really, really fun, and it was really cool to see like how well received it was, you know.
Yeah, I think it was one of the biggest things I saw like come out of it in terms of clips and videos and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I feel really lucky. It was really, really great.
I also saw when I was doing like some research for this today that GDQ did a Raya plushie.
I saw that too. I didn't even know about it, man. I was like, I found out like a few days after. So it was someone had made as like one of the donation like incentives, like you were put in for like a raffle to like get like a physical prize. Someone had made a Raya plushie, but holding an aerophone. Like a little stuffed aerophone.
Yeah.
And I didn't know about it until after the event. Like I had like gotten home and like all of the like buzz after the event, and like all of a sudden like somebody sent me the screenshot of the little Raya plushie with the aerophone, and I was like, dude, I want that. Wait, what? Huh? Can I have that, please? That's amazing.
I had my card ready for that. Like,
Yeah, I was like, I'll buy it. I don't care. I don't even want it for free. Like, let me just like make like I'll pay for it. Like,
uh,
I was like, that's sick.
yeah, I probably should have said Riot is the snake lady from Volcano Manor in Elden Ring. So it was like a plushie of her in a snake form holding like the aerophone.
It was amazing.
I know that's just reminded me along not similar lines, but something where your reach is also extended beyond just like the stream and the event. So in terms of that, someone's like gone and made a plushie with it. You are also in or on or however you would say it on Wikipedia under Radan's page.
Somebody sent that to me during one of my streams. They're like, dude, you're on Wikipedia. I was like, no, I'm not. Like, no, dude, here's the link. Look at it. And I was like, you gotta be. I was like, which one of you jokesters?
But yeah, people listening, just search up Starscourge Radan. He's got his own page, what a boss, and
it's
below
in there.
it's
Like, yeah,
completed runs through various different means and includes a list of runners, and the doc is in there.
yep. And it's because I did Consort Radon Hitless on the saxophone. And as far as I know, I believe I was the first person in the world to beat Shadow of the Erdtree on an alt controller, period. And by virtue of the fact that my first playthrough of Shadow of the Erdtree was on a saxophone.
Yep. Gave you a head start kind of thing.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's just like I already got it set up for Elden Ring. I'm just gonna my first playthrough is gonna be on sax. Why not?
Consort Radan's I personal belief is that is the hardest boss From Software has put out. So how did you find that? Never mind. Like, well, I can't say never mind because you were playing on your first playthrough on console with the aerophone. So how was that experience?
Okay, so here's the thing that's gonna make people mad. And I apologize. My first playthrough, I beat Consort Radon on my 12th attempt.
Wow, impressive work.
It was not as bad as I thought it was gonna be.
Okay.
That said, it's because my build was set up in a way that worked really well against him. I was using the carrion thrusting shield and the deflectier. And I was basically playing that fight like Sekiro.
Yep, great way to do it.
And it's really effective.
Yeah,
because the carrion thrusting shield is OP. It's really, 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 really powerful. Along with the deflecting tier, and then if you got your talisman set up to be very like tanky, like it's not as bad as you might think. That said, when I went back and I was like, I'm gonna try this hitless. Oh my god, it was freakishly difficult. It is definitely the hardest boss I've ever had to do hitless. It took me like 7 streams to beat him, like 40 hours or something like that, to before I got him hitless once. It was so painful.
They were on something when they made him.
Honestly, it's well, and luckily, so this was also like pre-patch.
Yeah.
And he's had that one like roll catch move.
Oh, the infamous frame trap.
Devastating.
Yeah, slash.
Yeah, the frame trap was terrible. And then all the flashing lights in phase 2 was just like way too much.
Yeah.
And also the terrain in that arena is also terrible for no hit. It's very bumpy and makes it really difficult to catch, you know. But got there eventually, and I was like, yeah, that sucked. It's really, 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 really hard.
How was Mesmer? Because he's probably my favorite fight of the DLC.
Mesmer is actually like fine. Mesmer didn't take me too long on my normal playthrough for hitless. I got fairly consistent with him. It's really fun. It's actually a really, really fun fight. Very satisfying, I should say. But my favorite fight in the DLC was Bale.
Yeah, solid one, definitely.
Yeah.
And also has the best NPC with him as well, so helps.
Of course.
So, like I say, when I was doing research, I saw you had quite a bump viewer stats-wise coming into this year. I was just interested in what the cause and effect of that was, if you know.
I mean, it's GDQ.
GDQ,
100%.
Yep.
Yeah.
Through that.
Doing the GDQ event was huge. I think during the event, I think the GDQ main page hit like 90,000 viewers during my run.
Damn.
That is the most amount of eyeballs I've ever had with in terms of like people
Yeah.
seeing what I do. And yeah, it's been amazing. It's been wild, absolutely wild. It's also, it's just been really cool to like have so many people like respond positively to what I do. It's really validating because it's again, it's like, it's a very silly thing, right? It's silly, and like, you know, I have worried that it's like very niche too, because it's like, not only is it hitless runs, which is already niche, but it's like on a saxophone. It's like, how do you explain that to people? But you know, once people saw it in action, people are like, wow, this is really great. And it's like I said, it's very like it's very validating.
Yep.
As a content creator.
It just crossed my mind, and I think you sort of answered it when we were talking earlier about the use of the aerophone isn't as much because a lot of the times you are moving and just using that knob and going about the day. But have you had found ways around making sure you keep that chat interaction? Because of course you can't speak and play at the same time. Of course, you know what I mean.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I've had to adapt a lot. There are times when I literally just can't talk. One of the things in a hitless run that a lot of runners will understand is that there are certain sections of runs where once you start them, you cannot stop until you get to the end of it.
Yeah.
Because of like enemy patrol patterns and that sort of thing. So that timing is very, very, very important. And in those situations, it's just one of those things where like right before that section starts, I'm like, okay, guys, I gotta doot through this. I'll see you on the other side. Yeah. You know. But there are some sections where you have a little bit more leeway, and it's like you just know where the safe zones are to like catch up with chat. I've also gotten fairly good. It's really people have commented on it where it's just like I'll like start a thought and I'll be like talking about something, and in the middle of a thought I'll start dooting and then like continue the thought as if like nothing had happened. Yeah. So it's just like, hey guys, how's it going today? I hope you had a really nice Friday. I hope you have a great weekend. So, and it's just something that I've just gotten really used to. I don't know.
I'm just like imagining like some scenes from movies where you got like radio static between words, and you just like get every third. Yep. Although for you, it's just like one continuous sentence with just doots in between.
Yep, pretty much just getting interrupted basically. But it's just something I've just gotten used to.
If you had one piece of advice for a new hitless runner, what advice would that be?
Play the game on PC.
Yes.
Play the game on PC, primarily because there are a lot more practice tools available to you. In particular, save state organizers. It is actually kind of a funny thing of a moment of realization for me was the fact that I was learning these runs on the saxophone. I realized that when I was working on the runs, I was practicing them the same way that I would practice like a piece of music.
Okay.
Where, you know, when you are learning to play something on an instrument, you learn how it generally works, and then you kind of like spot check sections to make sure that you're playing things accurately, like slow it down, repeat it over and over again. And when you're learning a hitless run, it's very similar, where it's like, okay, I have the general idea of where I need to go, what I need to do, and then there are really difficult sections, and the best way to learn them is to do that section over and over again.
Yeah.
And having the tools available to you, like a save state organizer, and being able to like quit out of the game quickly, like back to the title menu, and then like load a save state, do it again. It makes it so you can get a bunch of repetitions of that section or that boss fight. You can get a bunch of repetitions very quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
And it makes it so you just learn faster. So that is one thing I actually super recommend if you have the capability. Obviously play it on PC, because then you can and use like save organizers and practice tools if they're available.
Yeah, definitely second that. When I was doing hitless runs quite a while ago now, I only had console, so the save states for console is I don't know if it works for PS5, but with PS4 you can get a USB stick, you can plug in, you can go through a game, find a section. Okay, I'm behind this boss gate, I'm going to save here, save on USB, and you go through the game multiple times potentially, or just one full run, and then reload from the USB stick, and you're able to save that way. As opposed to on computer, you can potentially even get some save states off people depending on your game, but it's so much faster, so much quicker. And as you say, there's also practice tools with certain games, so it's like invulnerability or unkillable boss, which allows you to practice a lot more as well. So
100%.
If one game could be released tomorrow, either an announced, an unannounced, a remake, or a sequel that you've always wanted, what game would it be?
Bloodborne on PC.
Oh,
for the exact aforementioned reasons. I like I said, I have played Bloodborne on the aerophone, but obviously you can only play Bloodborne. Well, you can kind of. I won't say how you can play it on PC right now, but it's mostly you can only play it on PlayStation. I have figured out how to get my aerophone to connect to the PlayStation, but it's a pain in the butt compared to connecting it to the PC.
I'm impressed you managed to get that far. It's very awkward to do anything with them.
Yeah, it requires like some third party like hardware and also like a whole different kind of like programming that you have to do, but it's possible. But Bloodborne is one of those games that I would absolutely love to learn a hitless run on the aerophone, but because I don't have those practice tools and the like same ease of save state organizing, like you can like what you just mentioned with the USB stick, like you can do that for sure, but like I would say it's like twice as slow as loading a save state like with a save state organizer like Speed Souls. Having Bloodborne on PC would make it significantly easier to do something like that, and I would just love that. But you know how it is. It's just huffing on that Bloodbornium until the end of time.
And I should mention that the sad noise I guess I made at the start, that was because at the time of recording, and of course because of reasons which should be obvious, I can't mention names or places, that there was a 60 FPS quote unquote mod or that is being done by a fan or someone outside of Sony or From Software who was creating that 60 FPS patch, which in recent time, in the last week or so, has been took down or is in that process of being taken down, which is very sad days.
Weirdly enough, the DMCA reason was not actually because of the patch itself. It was because the website that hosted the patch used Bloodborne logos and the Bloodborne name. So that's why it got taken down. But the person who made that patch said that it was like abundantly clear that even though they weren't taking the patch down, this was like their roundabout way of taking the patch down. So
it's a way to do it, even if it's not directly.
Exactly. So, and it's like sort of like he was basically just like, it's crystal clear that they just do not want this patch out there. And so I'm gonna take it down until further notice.
Just let us enjoy the game.
I know. I don't understand why Sony is so weird about Bloodborne. I do not get it. It's people would freak out if there was a like even just like a PC port, honestly, like not even a remake. But who knows? We'll see. Because time will tell.
I remember the same thing happened with Bloodborne Kart, if you know about that project.
Yes. Yep.
I know that project is still going under a different name, but I remember that had issues as well because it got so far into development, and then only when it was in a more stable or at least a foreseeable release version, it was then, it's gone too far now. We'll send a letter.
Well, and the same creator did the Bloodborne demake, like the PlayStation X version. Bloodborne. And that also got DMCA'd this week.
I didn't even see that.
Right around the same time as the 60 FPS patch. So weird Bloodborne stuff going on this week for some reason. I don't know. We'll see. Again, I'm huffing on that Bloodborne until the end of time.
I've seen the Twitter threads going, this has got to be for a reason. There's a state of play coming out on Valentine's Day. Perfect day for a blood gore game coming out.
And it's the 10-year anniversary of this year.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll find out.
I don't have much hope anymore, but I don't know. We'll see.
Future us will find out soon, at least.
Yep.
If you could recommend one game for its soundtrack, which game would it be?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Not a Souls game. Katamari Damacy.
Oh, okay. I've not heard of that one.
Katamari Damacy. Or we heart Katamari. We love Katamari. Katamari is a series of games that were released for the PS2, where I guess you could call them puzzle games, but you play as a little guy that is rolling around a katamari, which is in Japanese is like roughly translates to like soul clump or something like that.
Okay.
It's basically a ball, and you start off as like a little guy rolling around a little ball that's like maybe like 5 centimeters tall, and you roll over objects in the game. Like it like puts you in like the middle of like a living room or like a Japanese living room, and there's like a bunch of objects everywhere, like silverware and trash and little like fruit and like mice, just like random stuff, and you roll over them and it sticks to the ball and it increases the diameter of the ball over time. And the point of the game is to, within a time limit, increase the size of the Katamari to a specific diameter. And it starts off, like I said, like really, really small. But by the end of the game, you're rolling up continents.
Okay.
And like oceans and clouds and like kaiju, and it's absolutely ridiculous. It has, I'm not joking, one of the greatest soundtracks ever made in a video game. It's go on Spotify, look up Katamari Damacy, Damacy, and listen to that soundtrack. It's like it's like a lot of like J-pop and like electronica stuff. It is incredible. Like they went way too hard on this soundtrack. It's so good. I can't recommend it enough.
Perfect. I'm gonna be like Spotify open as soon as we're done. What would you say, if you could pick one, would be your most hyped or fond memory in streaming or in your running career?
Beating Elden Ring Hitless for the first time. Yeah, getting that run for the first time. It was incredibly cathartic. I cried. Oh my god, I could not help it. It just like it was like waterworks for like almost 5 minutes straight on stream. I was like weeping. It was like months and months and months of. It was like, I think it ended up being like 6 months from like the beginning of like learning the Deathless run up until getting Hitless. Yeah, and then finally getting the run. I had been like in PB1 hell for like a month, and it being like, you know, a world's first, you know, and like this thing of like the aerophone initially just being, like I said, like a joke, you know, like doing it like playing Cuphead and being very bad at it, you know, and then suddenly it's like the world's first person to beat a hitless run of Elden Ring with this thing. It was just like so wild, and I'm really, really proud of it.
And to finish today then, what are the future plans of Dr. Doot PhD?
So, like I said, I'm working on Dark Souls 3 no hit right now. I'm at PB2. Very close.
Nice.
I almost got PB1 last night, but then Soul of Cinder had no chill. As tends to happen. Yeah. But I already know that after Dark Souls 3, I'm gonna go to Dark Souls 2 and try to get no hit run for that. Okay. And then after that, Dark Souls 1, and then the idea, like I said, people have already done alt controller no hit runs of Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3. So I would definitely not be the first person to do an alt controller no hit run of those games for Saxophone, but not alt controller. Yep. No one has done a trilogy marathon on an alt controller.
Ooh.
No one has done the trilogy, and there's only like a handful of people who've done trilogy at all. Yeah, it's a very
difficult and long run.
That would be really cool, though.
I shall pray for you for the what in general, but especially the.
I'm not gonna lie. The one that scares me the most is actually Dark Souls 1. Oh my god.
Okay.
Oh boy. Well, it's because Dark Souls 1, if you lock on to bosses, you only have 4 directional dodging.
Oh, true. Yeah.
And so for a lot of the run, you have to stay locked off, and that is the thing that scares me the most, because of the the aforementioned problems with like controlling the camera on the aerophone.
Yeah, my immediate thought went to Watcher and Defender. That I was praying for you, because of
Watcher and Defender is going to be really hard for sure. Hope because it'll be a leveled run, the adaptability should be pretty good. Yeah, so hopefully that'll help. But the real the fight that scares me the most out of anything in the trilogy, ONS, Ornstein and Smo,
always.
Oh my god, that's gonna be a nightmare. I already know it's gonna be a nightmare, but that's part of the reason why I wanted to start with Dark Souls 3, because Dark Souls 3 is actually the hardest of the entire trilogy, from what I understand, for no hit, for any percent no hit. And I was like, if I can get Dark Souls 3, I can get the other two. And learning Dark Souls 3 is gonna increase that skill ceiling that I had been hitting after finishing Elden Ring, and kind of forcing me to do more things unlock and having to control the camera more manually. And I feel like that I have gotten better at that, and that is going to set me up better for Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 1.
Almost 15 years later, Glitch is still a thing.
Still a thing.
I think even if they came out with a remake, they would include it just for the sake of it.
Jesus, I don't even know what to say. It's just like, it's just I have feelings about Dark Souls 1, but again, if we went down that rabbit hole, we'd be here for another hour.
Right, and if people wanted to check you out, where would they be looking?
Twitch.tv/DrDootPHD. You can find me, DrDootPHD, most platforms, YouTube, Twitter. Blue Sky is DrDoot.com. And on TikTok, it's DrDootPHD, but doctor is actually spelled out the word doctor. So DrDootPHD, but the word doctor at the beginning. But mostly on Twitch. That's my main platform.
Yep. And on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, all as DR and then do for those. Just to,
yes.
Yep.
DrDootPHD.
Perfect. Right. I really appreciate taking the time out for this. I've had a ton of fun going through this conversation. I hope you've enjoyed as well, man.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was super, super fun. This was a really great conversation. Thanks again for having me.
No problem at all. I hope everyone listening has also enjoyed and took that ride from classical music conversation for the first 15 minutes all the way down to the streams, the runs, and everything else. So I hope everyone's had a ton of fun with that. But yeah, that'll be it for today. I hope everyone has a great morning, evening, or day, depending on when you're listening. And we shall be back for the next one. So take care. If you enjoyed that conversation and want to hear more with amazing guests, be sure to head over to youtube.com/@nohitpodcast or wayofloci.com/nohitpodcast.